new adventure. Was your adventure pleasant today? Come, sit with us by the fire and warm yourself on this cold night. As the flames chase away the chill, would you like to hear the tale of my journey? Very well. Make yourself comfortable, let the warmth embrace you, and listen closely to the story I am about to tell. The Cursed Fortress. The villagers of Blackthorn had lived under the looming silhouette of the fortress for generations. Perched upon the jagged cliff at the edge of the valley, the fortress was a relic from an age long forgotten, its blackened stones scarred by time and war. At night, its towering walls seemed to swallow the moonlight, leaving the valley in an unnatural darkness. Children were warned never to stray near the path leading to its gates, and travelers who did often never returned. Those who claimed to have heard the fortress speak, low, mournful whispers that slittered down a mountainside, were dismissed as drunkards or madmen. Eamon, a young blacksmith's apprentice, had heard the stories all his life but never believed them. To him, the fortress was just an old ruin, nothing more than the bones of an ancient war. But one evening, as he was closing his forge, a strange sound drifted on the wind. A cry, faint but unmistakable. It was not the howl of a wolf, nor the call of any bird. It sounded like a voice, human and desperate, carried from the direction of the fortress, compelled by something he could not explain. Eamon took a torch and followed the sound of the path that wound its way through the cliffs. The air grew colder with every step, his breath turning to mist. The cries grew louder, echoing between the rocks until they seemed to surround him. Then suddenly they stopped. He found himself standing before the massive iron gates of the fortress. They were ajar. No one in living memory had ever seen them open. Heart pounding, Eamon stepped inside. The courtyard was overgrown, silent except for the creak of the gates behind him as they slowly swung shut. When the final clang echoed to the empty halls, the torches along the inner walls flared to life on their own, bathing the courtyard in a sickly, flickering light. And then he heard it again, a voice, this time whispering his name. Eamon froze, every muscle in his body tensed. The whisper of his name was soft, almost tender, but there was something deeply wrong about it, something that made his skin crawl. He spun around, holding his torch high, but the courtyard was empty. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, writhing as if alive, retreating just beyond the edge of the torchlight. "Who's there?" Eamon shouted, his voice breaking slightly. The only reply was the distant groan of the fortress's ancient stones, shifting as if the very structure were breathing. He pressed forward, his boots crunching over broken tiles and patches of dead grass. At the center of the courtyard stood an old well, its wooden cover shattered. The whisper came again, louder this time, rising from deep within the earth. He approached slowly, his torchlight barely illuminating the dark mouth of the well. The air around it was colder, so cold that frost formed on the stones. As Eamon peered into the blackness, something moved below, two pale, glowing points, like eyes staring up at him from the depths. His breath caught in his throat. The voice spoke again, clearer now. "Eamon, you should not have come here." Before he could react, a sudden gust of wind blew out his torch, plunging him into darkness. The ground beneath him seemed to shake, and from the well came a sound like 1,000 whispers at once, rising into a wail that pierced the night. Eamon stumbled backward, falling onto the cracked stones as the gates behind him groaned open again, but not to let him out. A figure stepped into the courtyard, cloaked in tattered black robes, its face hidden by a hood. It moved silently, gliding rather than walking. It stopped a few feet away from Eamon, who scrambled to his feet, heart hammering. "You have awakened the curse," the figure said, its voice echoing like it came from within the fortress itself. "Now, Blackthorn will pay the price." Before Eamon could ask what it meant, the figure raised one skeletal hand, and the torches along the walls flared violently, casting the courtyard in blood-red light. The shadow of the fortress seemed to grow, stretching far into the valley below as if reaching for the village. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure was gone. Eamon stood there trembling, alone in the courtyard, the silence now heavier than before. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled from the village below, an alarm that hadn't rung in decades. Whatever curse had lain dormant within the fortress was awake again, and Eamon knew that his life, and the lives of everyone in Blackthorn would never be the same. The bell's toll echoed to the valley like a funeral knell, pulling every villager from their homes. Torches flared to life along the main square as the people of Blackthorn gathered, their faces pale and fearful. No one had heard the bell since the last plague nearly a century ago. For it to sound now meant only one thing. Danger was coming. Eamon stumbled into the square, covered in dust and sweat, his eyes wide with terror. "The fortress!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Something has awakened in the fortress. The villagers erupted in a chorus of anxious voices. Some demanded answers. Others called him a liar. The elder of Blackthorn, a stooped man named Father Aldrich, stepped forward, leaning on his wooden staff, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Eamon. "Tell us what you saw," Aldrich said, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Eamon recounted everything. The cries, the open gates, the well, the cloaked figure. The villagers listened in silence, though many exchanged fearful glances. When he spoke of the curse, a woman in the crowd gasped and clutched her child. Aldrich's face grew grim. "The prophecy of Blackthorn," he said softly, as if speaking to himself. "The day will come when the gates open of their own accord, and the shadow of the fortress will fall upon the valley once more." "What does that mean?" someone cried. "Are we doomed?" The elder turned back to Eamon. "If what you say is true, then the curse is awake, and it will not rest until it has claimed its due." Before Eamon could respond, a scream rang out from the edge of the village. The crowd turned to see a farmer running toward them, his clothes torn, his face white with terror. "They're coming!" he shouted. From the forest, shapes, black as night. "They killed my oxen." The villagers scattered, rushing to their homes for weapons, locking doors, boarding windows. Father Aldrich grabbed Eamon's shoulder. "This is your doing," he said, his voice low but urgent. "But it may also be your destiny to end it. The curse chose you to awaken it. Perhaps it chose you to break it." Eamon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Break the curse? He was just a blacksmith's apprentice, not a hero. But before he could protest, dark shapes began to emerge in the tree lead. Twisted creatures of smoke and shadow, their glowing eyes scanning the village. The first attack had begun. The night erupted into chaos as the creatures descended upon Blackthorn. They moved like living shadows, their bodies shifting and twisting as though made of smoke. Yet their claws left deep gouges in wood and stone. The villagers fought back with pitchforks, axes, and torches, their shouts mixing with the shrieks of the monsters. Eamon found himself standing frozen in the middle of the square, his heart hammering in his chest. He had seen wolves before, even fought one off to protect the forge's goats, but these things were nothing natural. Their eyes glowed with sickly reddish light, and their movements were too fast, too deliberate. "Eamon!" someone shouted. It was Bran, the blacksmith and Eamon's master, swinging a heavy hammer as he drove back one of the creatures. "Get inside before they tear you apart." But Eamon couldn't move. His gaze had locked on the largest of the creatures, taller than a man, with long, spindly limbs and a head like a stag's skull. It stood just beyond the square, watching him. When it saw that Eamon was looking, it tilted its head in a slow, unnerving motion, as if acknowledging him. Then it spoke, its voice a rasp like dry leaves. "You woke us, little spark. Now burn with us." The creature lunged, and Eamon barely managed to dive aside as its claws slashed where he had been standing. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing a fallen spear from the ground. Bran came to his side, swinging his hammer with a roar. Together, they struck at the creature, driving it back. All around them, villagers were managing to push the creatures toward the edges of the square. The torches seemed to burn brighter the closer they were held to the shadows, forcing the monsters to retreat. Father Aldrich raised his staff high, chanting words in a language Eamon did not recognize, and the bell in the tower began to toll again, its sound driving the creatures back step by step until they vanished into the night. When the last of the shadows was gone, silence fell over Blackthorn. The villagers stood panting, clutching their makeshift weapons, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. Several homes had been damaged, and 2 men lay on the ground, their bodies torn and lifeless. Eamon's grip tightened on the spear. He could still feel the gaze of that stag-headed creature. Even though it was gone, Father Aldrich approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This was only the beginning," the elder said. "The fortress has awakened its servants. If we do nothing, the entire valley will fall." Eamon swallowed hard. He was no warrior, but deep down he knew what Aldrich meant. Whatever had been unleashed, he was somehow bound to it. And now he had to find a way to stop it before Blackthorn was wiped from the map. The next morning, the village square was silent except for crackle of dying fires. The smell of smoke and blood hung in the air, and the villagers moved like ghosts among the wreckage, tending to the wounded and burying the dead. Eamon had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the stag-headed creature staring back at him, its voice whispering in his mind, "You woke us. Now burn with us." He stood at the edge of the well in the square, staring at his reflection in the water. His face looked older, harder, as if the attack had carved something into him that could not be undone. Bran approached quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did well last night," Bran said. "Most would have run, but you stood and fought." "I didn't fight because I was brave," Eamon said, his voice hollow. "I fought because I had no choice." Bran nodded. "Bravery isn't about choice. It's about standing when running is easier." Father Aldrich joined them, leaning heavily on his staff. His face looked more lined than ever, but his eyes still burned with a fierce light. "The curse won't stop," he said. "It will send more creatures, stronger ones, until none of us are left. The only way to end this is to face it where it began, inside the fortress." Eamon looked up at the elder. "You mean me?" Aldrich gave a slow nod. "The shadow called to you. It chose you. Whether you wish it or not, you are tied to its fate." Bran frowned. "You would send the boy alone?" "He won't be alone," Aldrich replied. "There are things in the old church, maps, relics, records of the fortress, and the lords who once ruled it. If he is to survive, he must first learn what he is dealing with." That night, while the village kept watch for another attack, Eamon and Aldrich descended into the church's crypt. The air smelled of dust and ancient stone. At the far end of the chamber lay a sealed chest, its iron lock rusted but intact. Aldrich whispered a prayer, then struck the lock with his staff. It broke with a metallic snap. Inside were old scrolls, a silver dagger etched with runes, and a map, yellow with age, showing the fortress and its winding halls. But what caught Eamon's eye was a journal bound in cracked leather. Its cover bore the sigil of a black stag. "This belonged to Lord Kale," Aldrich said, his voice grave, "the last lord of the fortress, and the one who brought the curse upon himself and his bloodline. If there are answers, they are in these pages." Eamon opened the journal and began to read. The first entry was dated over 200 years ago. The words were shaky, written in haste. "I have bound the darkness to my will, but its hunger grows. If I cannot contain it, it will consume us all." Eamon's hands trembled as he turned the page. Whatever had happened in the fortress all those years ago, it was not simply war or betrayal. It was something far darker, and now he had no choice but to face it. At dawn, Eamon strapped the silver dagger to his belt, tucked the journal into his pack, and began to climb toward the fortress once more. The village watched him go in silence, knowing that he might never return. The path to the fortress felt different this time. The air was colder, heavier, as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. Eamon's boots crunched over the gravel path, every sound echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The sun barely pierced through the thick clouds, casting the valley in a gray half-light. When he reached the gates, they were open again, waiting for him. The memory of that first night came rushing back. The whispers, the cloaked figure, the blood-red light. But this time, Eamon gritted his teeth and stepped inside without hesitation. The courtyard was as silent as a tomb. The well still stood in the center, its mouth yawning like a dark wound. But now there were footprints in the dust, long, clawed prints leading from the well toward the main keep. Eamon tightened his grip on the torch and followed them. Inside the fortress, the air was damp and stale. Moss crept along the stone walls, and cobwebs hung like curtains across the corridors. The silence was so complete that Eamon could hear the pounding of his own heart. He followed the map Aldrich had given him, moving deeper into the keep until he found the great hall. Once, it must have been a place of feasts and banners, but now it was nothing more than a hollow ruin. The long table was shattered, the chandeliers lying in twisted heaps on the floor. At the far end of the hall stood a massive throne, carved from black stone, and sitting upon it was a figure. Eamon froze, his breath catching. The figure was skeletal, clad in rusted armor, its skull crowned with a broken circlet. Its empty eye socket seemed to watch him as he approached. The journal in Eamon's pack felt suddenly heavier. "This must be Kale," he whispered. As if in answer, the air shifted. A low, rasping voice filled the hall. Not from the corpse, but from everywhere at once. "You dare disturb my rest?" it said. "Child of the valley, do you seek death?" Eamon swallowed hard and drew the silver dagger. "I seek answers." There was a pause, then a sound like laughter, hollow and cruel. "Then step forward, and I will show you the truth." The torches along the walls flared to life, and the floor beneath Eamon's feet trembled. The shadows gathered around the throne, twisting into the shape of a man, tall, regal, and cloaked in darkness. His face was hidden, but Eamon could feel the weight of his gaze. "You woke what I can no longer contain," the shadow said. "The hunger grows again. Break the seal or watch your people burn." Before Eamon could speak, the shadow lunged toward him and the world went black. When he awoke, he was lying on the floor of the great hall. The throne was empty, the torches extinguished, but in his hand he still clutched the silver dagger. Its blade was glowing faintly, as if it had been dipped in moonlight. Something had changed. Eamon returned to Blackthorn just as the sun was setting, his clothes damp with sweat and dust, his mind still reeling from what he had seen. The villagers rushed to meet him, their faces tense, but when they saw he was alive, a ripple of relief spread through the crowd. Father Aldrich met him in the square. "You've been gone all day," he said. "What did you find?" Eamon didn't speak until they were back inside the church crypt. There, by torchlight, he spread the journal across the stone table and opened to the page he had read earlier. "It wasn't just war that cursed the fortress," Eamon said, his voice grim. "Lord Kale made a pact. He bound something, some kind of shadow, to protect his land, but it demanded a price, and when he refused to pay it, the shadow turned on him. He sealed it inside the fortress to stop it from consuming the entire valley." Aldrich's face was grave. "And now the seal is weakening." "Yes," Eamon said, pointing to the next page. Kale wrote that the seal was made of 3 bindings, each hidden in a different place around the valley. If they remain broken, the shadow will grow stronger until it cannot be stopped. Bran crossed his arms. "Then we mend them. Simple." "It won't be simple," Eamon said, turning the page. "Each binding is guarded." Kale wrote that he left trials behind to ensure no one tampered with them unless they were worthy. Aldrich leaned on his staff. "Then you must face these trials. The first is said to lie in the Ashen Woods." The name alone made the villagers murmur in fear. The Ashen Woods were a dead forest in the east, where no bird sang and no hunter dared tread. At dawn, Eamon set out again, this time with Bran at his side. The blacksmith refused to let him go alone. They followed the river until the trees grew dark and twisted, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick and heavy, and no sound of life reached their ears. Deeper into the woods, they found a stone arch half buried in the earth. Strange runes glowed faintly along its surface, and beyond it lay a clearing of blackened trees. "This must be it," Eamon said. As they stepped through the arch, the ground shifted beneath their feet. The forest around them changed, the trees twisting into impossible shapes, the air thick with whispers. At the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, and on it burned a pale, cold flame. A voice echoed through the clearing. "To mend the first seal, you must give what was taken. Blood for blood, will for will." Bran looked at Eamon sharply. "What does it mean?" Before Eamon could answer, the clearing filled with shadows, twisted figures, dozens of them, closing in from every side. Eamon drew the silver dagger, its glow brighter than ever. "This is the trial," he said, bracing himself. The shadows attacked. The clearing exploded into chaos. The shadows moved like smoke caught in a gale, twisting and striking from all directions. Eamon slashed with the silver dagger, its glowing edge cutting through the darkness as though it were flesh. Each time he struck, the creature dissolved into a wisp of black mist, but more came, pouring from the edges of the clearing. Bran swung his blacksmith's hammer in great arcs, smashing anything that came too close. "There's too many," he shouted over the din. "They're not real," Eamon said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The creatures looked real enough, their claws leaving gashes in the ground where they struck. Then the voice returned, low and cold, filling the clearing. "Blood for blood, will for will. What will you give to bind the seal?" Eamon faltered, nearly struck by a lunging shadow. "What does it want from me?" Bran drove back two of the creatures with a sweep of his hammer. "Maybe it wants your strength, or your courage, something of you." Eamon's breath came in ragged gasps. The journal's words came back to him. Kale paid the price once, but not fully. Maybe that was the key. Maybe this was not just a fight, but a choice. He sheathed the dagger and stepped toward the altar. The shadows swarmed closer, but did not strike. They seemed to hesitate, as if waiting. Eamon cut his palm with the dagger's edge and let his blood drip onto the stone. "I give my blood," he said, his voice steady. "My will is to see this curse broken." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pale flame roared higher, burning white-hot. The shadows let out a shriek that shook the trees and then vanished, leaving the clearing silent once more. The stone altar cracked, and from within it rose a shard of black crystal, pulsing faintly. Eamon reached out and touched it. The crystal dissolved into light, which flowed into the dagger, making it glow brighter than ever before. Bran exhaled, lowering his hammer. Was that it?" Eamon nodded slowly. "The first seal is mended." But as they turned to leave, the voice spoke one last time, softer now but no less ominous. "Two remain, but beware, child of the valley. Each seal demands a greater price than the last." Eamon tightened his grip on the dagger. Whatever came next, he knew it would only grow harder. By the time Eamon and Bran returned to Blackthorn, the sun had set and the village was burning. Smoke rose in dark columns against the night sky, and the screams of the villagers echoed through the valley. The shadows had returned, but this time they came in numbers greater than before. Eamon felt his stomach drop. "No!" he whispered, breaking into a run. They found the villagers fighting desperately in the square, barricades hastily built from carts and timber. Father Aldrich stood at the front, his staff glowing with faint light as he shouted prayers, holding the darkness at bay. "Eamon!" Aldrich cried as he saw them. "Did you mend the first seal?" "Yes." Eamon shouted back, drawing the silver dagger, which now blazed with white fire. "But it's not enough. The curse is still spreading." As if to prove him right, the stag-headed creature appeared once more, stepping into the square with deliberate calm. Its burning eyes locked on Eamon. "You think one seal will save you?" it said, its voice reverberating through the night. "The hunger has waited too long. It will not be satisfied." Eamon raised the dagger. "Then I'll mend the others. I'll stop this." The creature tilted its head, almost amused. "Then run, little spark. We will follow." The shadows struck again, but this time Eamon was ready. The dagger's light cut through them like fire through paper. Bran's hammer cracked their twisted forms with every swing. And when the last of the creatures fell, the square was silent save for the sobs of the surviving villagers. The cost had been high. Several homes destroyed and 4 villagers dead, including one of the watchmen. The people were weary, but their eyes now turned to Eamon not with fear, but with hope. Aldrich placed a hand on Eamon's shoulder. "The second seal lies to the north, in the ruins of the sunken chapel. Few dare to go there. The ground is treacherous, and the dead are said to walk." Bran spat on the ground. "Then that's where we're going next." Eamon hesitated. The Ashen Woods had nearly killed him, and this next trial promised to be worse. He looked at the villagers, at their grief, their fear, and felt something harden inside him. "I'll go," he said, "but we'll need more than just the 2 of us." That night, a 3rd member joined their party, a young huntress named Lyra, who had lost her brother in the attack. She carried a bow and a quiver of arrows tipped with silver, gifts from her late father. "I've hunted wolves and worse," she said simply. "If you're going into the sunken chapel, You'll need someone who knows the northern marshes. I'll guide you." At dawn, the three of them set out together. The road to the north wound through mist-covered hills and swamplands, where the ground sucked at their boots and strange shapes moved beneath the water. And somewhere ahead, beyond the marsh, the ruins of the sunken chapel waited. Its bells silent for centuries, its stones sinking slowly into the earth like a grave. The marshland stretched before them like an endless gray sea, the fog curling low over stagnant pools of black water. The air was damp and heavy, and every step they took was met with the sound of sucking mud and the distant croak of unseen creatures. "This is worse than I imagined," Bran muttered, his hammer slung over his shoulder. "Feels like we're walking through a graveyard." Lyra gave him a sharp look. "We are." Eamon glanced back at her. "What do you mean?" "The sunken chapel was built on an old burial ground," Lyra said, her voice low. "When the curse first spread, the dead began to rise. That's why no one comes here anymore." Eamon gripped the dagger tighter. The faint glow from its blade cast eerie reflections on the fog, as if warning them. They pressed on until the ground grew firmer, and the outline of crumbling stone walls came into view through the mist. The sunken chapel stood half submerged in the earth. Its roof collapsed, its bell tower leaning like a broken finger toward the sky. "This is it," Lyra said, stopping just short of the ruins. "Whatever trial waits here, we'll find it inside." As they stepped into the chapel's courtyard, the air grew unnaturally still. The fog thickened until it seemed to choke the light. Then, from the ground, pale hands began to claw their way upward. Figures rose from the earth, skeletons in rotted priestly robes, their empty eye sockets glowing faintly with cold fire. They turned toward Eamon and his companions, moving with jerky, unnatural steps. Bran swore under his breath. "I knew it. Walking bones." "They're guardians," Eamon said, raising the dagger. "This is the trial." The first skeleton lunged, and Lyra's arrow met it mid-charge, shattering its skull and dropping it back into the mud. But more came, dozens of them, surrounding the group in a tightening circle. Eamon fought with a dagger, its light searing through the undead, while Bran smashed bones to splinters with his hammer. Lyra's arrows flew swift and true, each one finding its mark. Then the chapel bell rang. Its sound was deep and hollow, shaking the very air. The skeletons froze for a moment, then began to move faster, more coordinated, as if guided by a single will. From the shadows beneath the bell tower, something larger emerged, a knight's corpse clad in rusted armor, a great sword in its skeletal grip. Its hollow voice echoed through the courtyard. "You seek the second seal," it said, then faced the warden. It charged. Eamon barely had time to raise his dagger before the warden's strike slammed into him, throwing him backward. Bran stepped in front of him, hammer raised. Lyra took aim at the knight's visor, but the arrow glanced harmlessly off the rusted metal. "This one's different," Bran growled. "We'll have to break it." Eamon climbed his feet, blood in his mouth but fire in his eyes. "Then we break it together." The warden raised its sword again, and the trial of the sunken chapel began in earnest. The warden's great sword came down like a falling tree, striking the earth and sending a shock wave through the courtyard. Eamon rolled aside just in time, the blade gouging a deep scar in the stone where he had stood. "Keep it distracted," Lyra shouted, loosing another arrow. This time she aimed for the joints in the warden's armor, and the arrow struck home, shattering its right knee. The creature staggered, but did not fall. Its glowing eyes locked on her, and with a roar it charged. Bran intercepted it, swinging his hammer with all his strength. The blow connected with the warden's chest, denting the rusted breastplate and sending the creature back a few steps. "Eamon," he bellowed. "Now!" Eamon rushed forward, the silver dagger blazing like a star. He slashed across the warden's arm, and where the blade struck, the bone hissed and smoked. The warden howled and retaliated with a backhand strike that sent Eamon crashing into the chapel wall. Pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to stand. "Eamon!" Lyra cried, loosing another arrow that struck the warden's skull. It reeled, dropping to one knee. "This is our chance," Bran shouted. Eamon gritted his teeth, gripping the dagger with both hands. He charged, driving the blade straight into the warden's chest. A blinding light erupted, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. The warden let out a final, echoing scream before collapsing into a heap of lifeless bones. The ground trembled, and from the altar inside the chapel a beam of pale light shot skyward, piercing the fog. Eamon felt the dagger grow warm in his hand as the second shard of the seal rose into the air. It drifted toward him, dissolving into blade just as the first had. Then silence. The skeletons that had surrounded the courtyard crumbled to dust, leaving nothing but empty ground. Lyra lowered her bow, breathing hard. Is it over? For now, Eamon said, though his voice was heavy. He could feel the dagger's glow pulsing in time with his heartbeat, stronger than before, almost alive. Bran placed a heavy hand on Eamon's shoulder. You did it! 2 seals down. Eamon looked around at the ruined chapel, at the bones of the warden scattered on the ground. 2 down, he said softly, but there's still 1 left. As they prepared to leave, a whisper echoed to the courtyard, soft, almost gentle. 1 remains, it said, but beware, child of the valley. The last seal is not hidden in stone, but in blood. Eamon froze. What does that mean? The whisper faded, leaving only the sound of the wind through the dead trees. On their journey back to Blackthorn, none of them spoke much. The road felt heavier now, the victory hollow. Whatever awaited them at the final seal, it would not be just another fight. It would demand a sacrifice, one that Eamon feared he might not be willing to make. The courtyard was silent, save for the faint creak of the ruined bell tower swaying in the wind. The mist began to thin, allowing a cold, gray light to spill over the chapel ruins. It felt as though the land itself had exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. Eamon stood over the warden's broken remains, staring at the smoking dagger in his hand. The weapon still thrummed faintly, as though alive, and he could feel it tugging at something deep within him. Eamon, Lyra said softly, stepping closer. You're bleeding. He looked down and saw blood soaking through his tunic, where the warden's strike had caught him. He hadn't even felt it until now, the adrenaline keeping him moving. Lyra tore a strip from her cloak and began wrapping his side, her hands steady despite the weariness in her face. You nearly got yourself killed, Bran said gruffly as he wiped his hammer clean. Next time, wait for me to get his attention before you charge an undead knight twice your size. Eamon gave a tired smile. Next time I'll try. When the bandaging was done, they stepped inside the sunken chapel. The interior was half collapsed, the floor littered with broken pews and shattered icons. Yet at the center, the altar still stood, now glowing faintly. Upon it rested a fragment of stone carved with the same sigil they had seen at the crypt. This must have been part of the original seal, Lyra whispered. The warden wasn't just guardian, he was bound to it. Eamon approached, the dagger humming more intensely with each step. When he touched the stone, it dissolved into light and was absorbed into the blade. The glow of the dagger flared, casting a long shadow of Eamon on the chapel wall. For a brief, unsettling moment, the shadow didn't move as he did. Bran frowned. Did anyone else see that? Yes, Lyra said, her voice tense. And I didn't like it. Eamon sheathed the dagger, trying to ignore the chill running down his spine. Let's get out of here before something else wakes up. As they crossed the courtyard, the chapel bell rang again, this time faintly, as if carried by the wind. A voice, almost human, whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. 1 seal remained, but blood must answer blood. Lyra froze. What does that mean? Bran scowled. I don't like the sound of it. Blood magic never means anything good. Eamon stared at the ground, deep in thought. He remembered the dream that had led him here. The voice calling him heir of the valley. Was this what it had meant? That the last seal would demand something of him? Something personal? They left the ruins without another word. As they made their way back through the marsh, the fog seemed to part for them now, almost guiding them toward the edge of the valley. But the sense of foreboding only grew stronger with each step, as though the land itself was watching, waiting. By the time they reached the first stretch of dry earth, night had fallen. The stars shone coldly overhead, and Eamon felt as though they were being counted. There's no going back now, he said quietly, moored himself into the others. Whatever waits at the last seal, I have to face it. Bran gave a short nod. Then we'll face it with you. Lyra looked at Eamon, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of worry in her eyes. Just promise me one thing, she said softly. Don't give it more than it asks for. Eamon said nothing, gripping the dagger tightly as they disappeared into the night. The road to Blackthorn was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that spoke of something gone terribly wrong. Even the night insects were still. As they reached the outskirts of the village, they saw smoke rising from several cottages, and the once bustling square stood empty. Gods! Bran muttered, gripping his hammer. We're too late. They moved cautiously through the streets. Doors hung open. Belongings were scattered, and strange black marks stained the walls, as though something had burned its way through the village. Then came the sound, soft weeping. Following it, they found a group of villagers huddled inside the old grain store. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. Among them was Elder Marek, the oldest man in Blackthorn and keeper of the village's lore. You returned, Marek said, his voice thin. But the darkness has grown bolder. It came at sunset, tearing through our homes. It took some of us, others it left behind. Why now? Lyra demanded. Why tonight? The old man's gaze shifted to Eamon, and there was something like pity in his eyes. Because it knows, he said softly. It feels the seals weakening. The fortress calls to you, Eamon of the Valley. Eamon knelt in front of him. Elder, we've broken 2 seals. The last one, what is it? How do we destroy it? Marek's hands trembled as he reached for a leather-bound tome at his side. He opened it to a page marked with a blood-red ribbon. The last seal was not made of stone, nor kept by a guardian. It was made with blood, the blood of the fortress's first master, who cursed these lands when he fell. Only the blood of his descendant can unmake it. Eamon felt the ground tilt beneath him. His descendant? Marek nodded slowly. You carry his blood, boy. That is why the dagger chose you. That is why the fortress calls you by name. Bran's eyes widened. So you're saying the last seal is him? He pointed at Eamon. Not him. Marek corrected. But his life, his blood, must be spilled to open the final gate. Silence fell over the room. Lyra looked from Marek to Eamon, her face pale. That's madness, she said. There must be another way. There isn't, Marek said firmly. Blood for blood. That is the curse. Break it and the fortress dies. Refuse it and the valley will be consumed. Eamon stood, his hands clenched into fists. If I do this, will it end? Will my village be free? The old man closed the tome. Yes, but the price will be yours alone to pay. Eamon walked outside, away from the huddled villagers. The moon was high now, casting long, cold shadows over the ruined square. Bran followed him, laying a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to decide tonight, Bran said quietly. Yes, I do, Eamon replied, his voice low. The curse won't wait. If it's my blood the fortress wants, then I'll give it. Better me than all of them. Lyra appeared at the doorway, her bow still in her hand. Don't talk like that, she said, her voice sharper than she meant to be. You think throwing your life away will fix everything? What if this is exactly what it wants? Eamon looked at her, his jaw tight. If there's even a chance that it ends a curse, then it's a risk I have to take. Before anyone could say more, a scream tore through the night, a villager's cry from the edge of the forest. Shadows poured into the square, coalescing into humanoid forms with burning eyes. They're here, Bran roared, pulling his hammer free. Eamon drew the dagger, its light flaring so brightly that the shadows hissed and recoiled. The battle for Blackthorn had begun. The shadows surged forward like a black tide, and the night was suddenly alive with the clash of steel and the hiss of spectral forms. Eamon's dagger blazed white, each strike cutting through the darkness like fire through parchment. Wherever he struck, the shadows shrieked and dissolved, but more kept coming. Bran fought like a living wall, his hammer smashing into the ground and scattering 3 shadow creatures at once. Stay together, he bellowed. Don't let them split us up. Lyra was already loosing arrows from the grain store rooftop, her shots quick and precise. Each arrow that struck a shadow burst into a puff of smoke, but the creatures were relentless, reforming almost as fast as she could shoot. Then Eamon heard it. Faint at first, like a whisper behind the noise of battle. "Eamon!" He froze, nearly missing a strike. The voice was smooth, calm, and eerily familiar. "The third seal waits. You cannot fight them all. Come to the fortress. Finish what was begun. Not now." Eamon snarled aloud, driving the dagger through another shadow. But the voice grew louder, more insistent, until it drowned out the screams and the clash of weapons. Blood must answer blood. Your death will free them. Your death will free you. "Eamon!" Lyra's shout snapped him back. A shadow was nearly on him, and he spun just in time to slash it apart. Bran grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the well in the center of the square. "They're not stopping," he growled. "We'll lose the whole village if this keeps up." Aemon's breath came in ragged gasps. He could feel the dagger burning in his grip now, almost too hot to hold. Every pulse of its light seemed to be in rhythm with the voice in his head. Lyra dropped down beside them, her quiver nearly empty. "We can't hold this forever. Whatever that thing is saying to you, Eamon, we need to know." Eamon hesitated, then spoke quickly. "The fortress, it's calling me. It wants me to come now, to finish it. It says if I give my blood, this ends." Bran cursed under his breath. That's a demon's bargain if I've ever heard one. But what if it's right? Eamon shouted, slashing another shadow that got too close. "We can't fight them all. This is only going to get worse." Lyra grabbed him by the collar, forcing him to look at her. "You're not throwing your life away in the middle of a fight. If you're going, we all go together." Before Eamon could answer, a thunderous sound rolled across the valley. All the shadows froze for a split second, then began to retreat, flowing back toward the forest like black water draining away. "What in the hells?" Bran muttered. Eamon stared into the darkness where they had fled. In the distance, on the far hill, he saw it. The fortress, glowing faintly, its ruined towers lit as though by some unholy fire. "It's opening," Eamon whispered. Marek appeared, leaning heavily on his staff. "Then it has chosen the final night," he said grimly. "You have until moonrise tomorrow. After that, nothing will hold it back." Eamon sheathed the dagger, his decision clear. "Then tomorrow night," he said, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "We go to the fortress. One way or another, this ends." Lyra's gaze lingered on him, full of worry she couldn't hide. Bran only grunted, nodding once, and above them, the moon looked cold and distant, as if watching a story whose ending it already knew. Dawn came gray and hollow over Blackthorn. The villagers worked in silence to repair what they could, but a sense of doom hung heavy in the air. All eyes followed Eamon, Lyra, and Bran as they prepared to leave. Some crossed themselves, others turned away. Marek came to them before they departed, carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a strip of black cloth, old but well kept. "The last piece of your family's past," the elder said, handing it to Eamon. "It was worn by your ancestor when he fell. If you face the fortress, you should face it knowing who you are." Eamon tied the cloth around his forearm, feeling its weight like a chain. "Thank you," he said softly. The three set out at midday. The road to the fortress was narrow and overgrown, the air colder with every mile. The closer they came, the darker the skies seemed to grow, even though the sun was still high. By the time they reached the valley's edge, night had already begun to fall. The fortress loomed ahead, its walls black against the horizon, its ruined towers seeming to lean toward them like watching sentinels. "Feels like it's been waiting for us," Bran muttered, gripping his hammer tighter. "It has," Eamon said quietly. "I can feel it." The drawbridge was down, though no one had lowered it. They crossed it slowly, weapons ready, but no sentries appeared. The great gates yawned open, leading into a courtyard choked with weeds and rubble. Then the illusions began. At first they were faint, shadows of long-dead soldiers patrolling the walls, their armor clinking softly, their faces hidden behind helmets. But as they moved deeper into the fortress, the visions grew sharper. Eamon heard voices, his father's, his mother's, calling his name. He saw the village as it had been before the curse, alive with laughter and color. Then he saw it burning, the sky black, his friends screaming. "Eamon!" Lyra grabbed his arm, shaking him. "It's not real." He blinked, and the vision was gone. Sweat trickled down his face. "It felt real," he said hoarsely. "That's the fortress," Bran growled. "It's trying to break you before you get to the last seal." They pressed on, through corridors where the air grew thick with the smell of dust and death. The deeper they went, the more the fortress seemed to twist around them. Hallways that bent impossibly, staircases that led them back to where they started. At one point, they found themselves in a great hall where a feast was laid out: roasted meat, bread, wine. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, and the smell of food was intoxicating after days of travel. "It's not real," Lyra said again, though her voice faltered as her stomach growled. Bran took a step toward the table. "Doesn't look dangerous." Eamon raised a dagger. The moment its light touched the feast, the illusion vanished, leaving only bones and moldy plates crawling with insects. "Keep moving," Eamon said, his voice tight. Finally, they reached the inner gate. Beyond it lay a courtyard dominated by a massive stone door carved with runes. The last seal, the dagger pulsed in Eamon's hand like a living heart. "Once we go through," Bran said, looking at the others, "there's no turning back." Lyra's eyes met Eamon's. "Are you ready?" Eamon looked at the door, then at the strip of cloth on his arm. The voice of the fortress whispered at the edge of his thoughts, promising peace, release, power. "I'm ready," he said. And with that, he placed the dagger against the stone. The runes flared blood red, and the door began to open. The massive stone door groaned open, its weight shaking the very walls of the fortress. A blast of cold air poured out, carrying the smell of old blood and dust. Beyond the threshold lay a vast ceremonial hall, its vaulted ceiling supported by cracked pillars. Ancient banners hung in tatters from the walls, bearing a sigil Eamon recognized, the crest from the dagger's hilt, the crest of his bloodline. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The door closed behind them with a final, thunderous boom. Then the torches along the walls flared to life one by one, bathing the hall in a pale, reddish glow. Figures appeared around them, dozens of them, not flesh and blood, but spectral, half-transparent. Warriors in battered armor, priests in blood-stained robes, nobles with hollow eyes. Their faces were solemn, their gazes fixed on Eamon. Lyra's hand went to her bow, but Eamon raised a hand to stop her. "They're not attacking," he whispered. A single figure stepped forward from among the phantoms. He was taller than Eamon, his spectral armor unbroken, his face stern but not unkind. "Eamon of the Valley," the figure said, his voice deep and resonant, echoing through the hall. "You have come to end what I began." Eamon swallowed hard. "You're him," he said, "the master of the fortress." The spirit inclined his head. "I am Kael Draven, last lord of this place. When my people were betrayed, I bound my blood to this land. My curse was my vengeance and my prison. But you," his eyes seemed to pierce into Eamon's soul. "You are my heir. The curse lives because my blood lives." "So it's true," Eamon said quietly. "To break it, I have to die." Kael's expression softened. "Yes, the seal is made of blood. Yours must flow where mine once did, upon the altar, where the fortress will remain chained to this world forever." Lyra stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "There has to be another way, some other sacrifice, something besides him." Kael turned his gaze on her. "There is no other way. His death will end the curse. His life will prolong it, and soon the curse will consume the valley completely." Bran growled, gripping his hammer. "Then maybe we destroy the fortress itself. Tear it down stone by stone." Kael shook his head. "Strike these walls, and they will rebuild themselves. Strike me, and I will rise again. Only blood can break blood." Eamon stepped toward the altar at the center of the hall. It was a block of black stone, its surface stained dark with centuries-old blood. The dagger pulsed in his hand, calling to it. Lyra caught his wrist. "Eamon, wait. This is exactly what it wants. What if this isn't the end? What if it's just a fortress feeding on you?" Eamon's jaw tightened. "And if it's not? If this really does free everyone? How many more people die if I walk away?" Bran stepped between them, his face grim. "Then let's make damn sure this is the truth before you do something that can't be undone." Kale's ghostly eyes glowed faintly. The choice is his and his alone. But choose soon, for the curse grows impatient. The torches flickered, and from the shadows of the edges of the hall came a sound. Low, rumbling, hungry. The darkness there thickened, began to take shape. Lyra drew her bow. Bran raised his hammer, and Eamon gripped the dagger tighter. Whatever was coming, it was not going to let him decide in peace. The shadows poured from the edges of the hall, like smoke giving form, twisting and writhing until they became creatures with claws and jagged teeth. Their glowing eyes fixed on Eamon, and their hiss rose into a terrible chorus that rattled the air. "They're not waiting for you to decide," Bran growled, swinging his hammer as the first shadow lunged. Bone-cracking force sent it flying back, but more surged forward, filling the hall. Lyra loosed arrow after arrow, each shot cutting through a shadow and scattering it like ash in the wind. But for every one she struck down, two more took its place. Kale Draven's ghostly figure remained calm, standing beside the altar like a judge awaiting a verdict. "They will not stop," he said. "Choose quickly." Eamon fought furiously, the dagger glowing like molten silver as it tore through the creatures. Yet even as he struck them down, the voice in his head grew louder, pressing, urging. "Spill your blood. End this now. All will be at peace." Eamon stumbled back against the altar, sweat stinging his eyes. His chest heaved as he looked down at the dagger, its glow so bright it was almost blinding. "Eamon!" Lyra shouted, snapping him back. She had taken a cut across her arm, blood soaking her sleeve. Bran stood with his back to them, holding off the advancing tide. "You have to choose," Lyra cried. Eamon looked at the altar, then at Lyra, then at the endless swarm of shadows. His mind screamed with the weight of the decision. If he offered his blood, it might end everything, but it would cost him his life. If he refused, the curse might consume the valley. His voice broke. Kale stepped closer, his spectral hand pointing to the altar. "Your death will free them all. Do it now before it is too late." But then, from somewhere deep within Eamon, another thought arose, quiet but fierce. What if it's lying? What if the curse wants me to die so it can live on untethered? He gritted his teeth, feeling something shift inside him. "No," he said aloud, his voice steady. "Not like this." Kale's expression hardened. "You would deny your blood? I would deny being a prisoner to it." Eamon shouted, "If this curse is my family's legacy, then I'll end it my way." He turned the dagger not toward himself, but toward Kale. The Ghost Lord's eyes widened. "You dare!" Eamon charged, driving the glowing dagger into Kale's spectral chest. Light exploded through the hall, searing away the shadows in a wave of radiance. Kale screamed, a terrible sound that shook the very stones, and the other spirits began to wail, their forms dissolving into streams of light. The fortress groaned, walls cracking as though struck by an earthquake. The altar split in two, blood turning to dust. When the light faded, Kale was gone. The hall was empty. The dagger lay cold and dull in Eamon's hand. Bran leaned on his hammer, panting. What just happened?" Lyra looked around, her expression stunned. "You killed him. You broke the curse by killing him, not yourself." Eamon stared at the dagger, his hand trembling. "I didn't just kill him," he said softly. "I ended him. There's no coming back for any of them." The ground beneath them began to tremble, dust raining from the ceiling. "We have to get out of here," Bran shouted. They ran to the collapsing fortress, the corridors shaking and crumbling as the curse unraveled. When they finally burst through the gates, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the valley. Behind them, the fortress let out one final, shuddering roar before collapsing in on itself, leaving nothing but a mound of blackened stone. Eamon fell to his knees, exhausted, the dagger slipping from his hand. Lyra knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. Eamon stared at the smoking ruins. "No," he whispered. "It's just begun." The smoke over the valley did not clear for 3 days. When it finally did, the villagers of Blackthorn climbed the hills to see the ruins of the fortress for themselves. Where once the black walls had towered over the valley, now only a shattered mound of stones remained, like the bones of some great beast that had finally been slain. Eamon stood apart from the crowd, his arms crossed, the dull dagger hanging from his belt. Though the curse had been broken, he still felt the weight of it, like a shadow clinging to his heart. He had seen too much death, too many spirits bound in agony, to celebrate easily. Lyra approached, her wounded arm now bandaged. "You haven't spoken since we returned," she said gently. "I keep thinking about him," Eamon admitted. "Kale Draven. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man who tried to save his people and damned them instead. I ended him without giving him a chance to make it right." "You gave him peace," Lyra replied. "Maybe the only peace he could ever have." Bran joined them, carrying 3 mugs of ale from a hastily built camp nearby. "Peace or not, we did what had to be done. The valley's free now. Blackthorn can finally live without fear." He handed Eamon a mug and grinned. "Drink. You've earned it." Eamon hesitated, then took the mug and sipped. The ale was warm and bitter, grounding him in the present moment. For the first time since the night he heard the voice calling his name, he felt truly alive. That night, the villagers lit great bonfires on the hillsides, celebrating the end of generations of dread. Music and laughter filled the air. Children danced where the shadow of the fortress once fell, no longer afraid. Eamon watched the flames from a distance, sitting on a fallen stone from the fortress wall. Lyra sat beside him, her presence calm and steady. "What will you do now?" she asked. He looked at the dagger on his belt, now nothing more than a relic. "I don't know, but whatever I do, I can't stay here. The valley feels different now, lighter. It doesn't need me anymore." Lyra smiled faintly. "Then I suppose we'll go where we're needed next." He turned to her, surprised. "You'd come with me?" "I think someone has to keep you from charging headfirst into another cursed ruin," she teased. Bran's laughter boomed behind them as he approached. "Then count me in. Somebody's got to carry the heavy things." Eamon looked from Lyra to Bran, then back to the bonfires blazing in the dark. For the first time in his life, the future felt like something he could choose, not something chosen for him by fate or blood. He stood, tightening the strap of his pack. "Then let's go. There are other shadows out there, and we're not done yet." The 3 of them left before dawn, their silhouettes framed against the rising sun. Behind them, the valley of Blackthorn stirred to life, free of the cursed fortress at last. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth where the fortress had stood, a faint ember glowed briefly, and then went out forever. How was my story today? Is your body feeling warm now? If you're interested in hearing more of my stories, come back to this spot while you rest after your long journey.